All right, good afternoon. In a short while, you will hear a briefing by Ambassador Fu Kong, the permanent representative of China, and of course, he's here to brief you on the program of work as he has assumed the presidency of the Security Council for the month of February. And just as a reminder, that briefing will be in person only, so the Zoom link will not be working. If you want to follow from home, go on UN Web TV. Starting off with our friend Tom Fletcher, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, who arrived in Israel and the Occupied Palestinian Territory today for a week-long visit. During his travels, he will engage with authorities, our humanitarian partners, and those on the front lines of the response. Today in Ramallah, Mr. Fletcher met with Prime Minister Mohammad Mustafa and several Palestinian ministers from the Palestinian Authority. He also held separate meetings with Dr. Younis Al-Khatib, president of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, and that was to discuss the challenges that emergency responders are facing. In the coming days, Mr. Fletcher will meet with Israeli and Palestinian officials and visit areas in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Israel to see the situation firsthand and get a better understanding of the obstacles facing aid partners and also look at how to best and improve our humanitarian operations. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, meanwhile, tells us that we, along with our humanitarian partners, are expanding life-saving aid operations as more humanitarian supplies arrive in Gaza. OCHA says that displaced people continue to move between southern and northern Gaza as they reunite with their families and begin to try to rebuild their lives. As of today, we and our humanitarian partners estimate that more than 545,000 people have crossed from south to the north over the past week. More than 36,000 people have been observed moving from north to the south. OCHA also notes that protection partners have distributed more than 30,000 child identity bracelets to children under the age of 4 to prevent any family separation. This effort was critical as partners reportedly received more than 250 young people who'd been separated from their caregivers while making the trek back to North Gaza. In North Gaza Governorate, protection partners say they've also created 3 temporary sites that have been established in Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and Jabalia. Each of these 3 sites can host up to 5,000 people. Yesterday, the UN Population Fund reported the expansion of protection services for women in Jabalia and North Gaza, as well as Gaza City. And also yesterday, the World Food Program noted that prices have started to fall since the ceasefire took effect as more humanitarian commodities enter Gaza, although they still remain above pre-conflict levels. 1/3 of households reportedly have better access to food, but consumption remains significantly below levels prior to the escalation of hostilities. For most households, the primary obstacle is just lack of cash. Meanwhile, our partners are working on education, report that some 280,000 school-aged children in Gaza have registered in UNRWA's e-learning programs. And moving over to the West Bank, OCHA tells us that the Israeli forces' ongoing operations in Jenin and Tulkarm have expanded to the nearby governorate of Tubas, resulting in further death, destruction, and displacement. OCHA warns that once again lethal warlike tactics are being applied, raising concerns over the use of force that exceeds law enforcement standards. Yesterday in Jenin refugee camp, Israeli forces reportedly destroyed 20 residential structures where more than 50 families were living. OCHA also tells us that tight movement restrictions across the West Bank continue to hamper access to basic services, leaving Palestinians queuing for hours at Israeli checkpoints or forced to take lengthy detours to get to where they need to go. Also have an update from further up north and our colleagues at UNIFIL, the UN Peacekeeping Force in southern Lebanon. They are telling us that the area of operations along the Blue Line between Lebanon and Israel continue to be generally calm. They also note that continued IDF presence in several locations along the Blue Line, from Marwahin village towards the east to the Sheba farms, along with some gatherings by Lebanese civilians seeking to return. Yesterday, many civilians returned to the villages south of Lebanon, attempting to get many civilians returned to areas in South Lebanon, attempting to get to some villages. Despite the tension, the situation remains relatively calm, and peacekeepers did not observe any civilian injuries. Our Blue Helmets also are continuing to support the Lebanese armed forces on the ground, and they urge local to follow the instructions given to them by the Lebanese armed forces, and that is for their own safety and their own security. On the humanitarian end in Lebanon, colleagues tell us that hundreds of thousands of people are beginning to return to their communities, but many are still on the move. According to the International Organization for Migration, more than 100,000 people remain displaced in Lebanon. We and our partners continue to provide support to returnees and displaced people. That support includes blankets, clothes, and other items. We also support mobile clinics with the delivery of medical supplies and medicine. According to UN Habitat, over 15,000 buildings have been damaged or destroyed in South Lebanon, generating 8 million tons of debris. We reiterate that immediate support is crucial to restore essential services, rebuild livelihoods, and drive recovery efforts. Turning to Syria, our special envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, who's been in Syria for the last weeks, engaging with caretaker authorities and a broad spectrum of Syrians and following all developments on the ground closely. In addition to his meetings with Ahmed al-Shara earlier in January, he had 2 follow-up meetings with the caretaker foreign minister, Asad al-Shaibani. He appreciated the substantive dialogue he had with both. While in Syria, Mr. Pedersen is also met with a diverse range of Syrian representatives, groups, and individuals from all parts of the country involved in a full range of political, community, religious, and organizational activities. The special envoy was deeply struck by the shared conviction among all Syrians he met that the success of Syria's political transition is essential and it cannot afford to fail. At the cornerstone of all of this, Mr. Pedersen consistently heard from all Syrians he met is the need for all Syrians to be genuinely protected and for all Syrians to be fully included in shaping the future of their own country. In this regard, Mr. Pedersen has also welcomed the clear assurances repeatedly given by the caretaker leadership, publicly and also directly to him, that the new Syria will be for all Syrians and built on inclusive and credible foundations. In this regard, he sensed a genuine convergence between the expectations of the Syrians, commitments of the caretaker authorities, and the key principles underpinning Security Council Resolution 2254. Turning to the Sudan, the Secretary General is deeply alarmed by reports of summary executions of civilians in Khartoum North, allegedly by fighters and militias allied with the Sudanese armed forces. Many of the victims of these incidents were allegedly originally from Darfur or the Kordofan regions of Sudan. The Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights continues to corroborate these ongoing developments. The Secretary General reminds all warring parties in Sudan of their obligations under international law, especially in relation to the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Sudanese women, Sudanese children, and Sudanese men are paying the price for the continued fighting by the belligerents. The Secretary General renews his appeal for the parties to immediately cease fighting and take steps towards a lasting peace that the people of Sudan so desperately need and they so desperately demand. And on the humanitarian front, in areas beyond Khartoum North, Our colleagues tell us they're deeply concerned about the continued attacks on civilians by the parties across the country. In Khartoum State on Saturday, a strike on a crowded market and attacks on several residential areas in Omdurman reportedly left 60 people dead and more than 150 injured. In recent days, civilian casualties have also been reported due to attacks in North Kordofan and North and South Darfur. In North Darfur's capital, El Fasher, the civilian death toll is reportedly rising due to ongoing clashes, artillery shelling, and airstrikes. OCHA is particularly concerned and alarmed by reports of ongoing attacks in Abu Shuk displacement camp, where, as you know, famine conditions were identified late December. As you must have seen, the statement by the humanitarian and resident coordinator for Sudan, Clementine Nkweta Salami, over the weekend, where she condemned these indiscriminate attacks and called for an immediate end to the bloodshed. OCHA is also gravely concerned about rising cases of severe malnutrition in Khartoum State. Local reports indicate to us more than 70 hunger-related deaths, mostly among children. In January alone, 1,100 cases of severe malnutrition were recorded in 3 neighborhoods of Omdurman, underscoring the urgent need for food assistance and for a cessation of hostilities. Malnutrition rates are especially high in areas where access restrictions have forced the closure of community kitchens that many families relied on their survival. We stress once again the urgent need for increased funding and logistical support to sustain nutrition programs in community kitchens, ensuring that the most vulnerable, especially children and older people, receive adequate food, nutrition, health care, and assistance. And just south of Sudan, in South Sudan, our peacekeeping mission there tell us they're also gravely concerned by the ongoing violence between cattle keepers and farming communities in East Equatoria State. Armed conflict over the weekend has led to civilian displacement, an unverified number of casualties, and widespread public fear. Nick Haysom, the head of the peacekeeping mission, has called for all involved parties to demonstrate restraint. At the same time, the mission is engaging with communities and authorities to reduce tensions, and it is also sending peacekeeping patrols to impacted areas to boost security. And turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, first on the humanitarian front, our humanitarian colleagues say they're concerned about escalating health risks with the rainy season intensifying. There are still bodies of people who died in the violence lying in the streets of Goma. Our colleagues tell us that morgues are at capacity and hospitals and health centers are overwhelmed with injured people. While efforts to chlorinate water are underway with the support of our humanitarian partners, the lack of drinking water is forcing people in Goma to rely on untreated water from Lake Kivu, as we told you last week. Also in Goma, economic and other activities are gradually resuming, but schools and banks remain closed. 2 humanitarian organizations and government entities have had their vehicles hijacked over the weekend. 8 organizations continue to assess the impact of the looting of their warehouses as these groups try to resume the delivery of aid in and around Goma. Between Friday and Saturday, OCHA and its humanitarian partners jointly assessed displacement sites in and around Goma. Initial findings reveal that many camps have been looted, they've been destroyed and abandoned. While some people may have returned to their communities or sought refuge elsewhere, many people still lack adequate shelter and access to basic services. For its part, the World Food Program is telling us that they're actively pre-positioning supplies and ready to resume their operations as soon as conditions allow. The agency is also strengthening preparedness efforts in neighboring countries, working with UNHCR, with IOM, and others to develop contingency plans. Given the risk of increased displacement as we've seen it, WFP is ensuring readiness in Rwanda, in Uganda, Burundi, and Tanzania. And as a reminder, 1 out of every 4 people across the DRC faces acute hunger, including children and pregnant and nursing women. Armed violence, continued conflict, and soaring food prices are obviously key drivers in the DRC's food insecurity. On the peacekeeping side, our colleagues at MONUSCO, our peacekeeping mission in the Congo, but mostly in the eastern part of the country, are telling us about their ongoing concerns regarding the reported advance of the M23 towards South Kivu's capital, Bukavu, As a reminder, since June of last year, MONUSCO is no longer present in South Kivu as part of the agreed upon disengagement plan with the host country. Our colleague says the M23 is reportedly consolidating its presence in the capital Goma through regular patrols and house searches. Looting and occupation of private homes by the armed groups has also been reported, as well as attempts to seize vehicles, including those by a humanitarian organization, which is, of course, a violation of international humanitarian law. Meanwhile, in South Kivu, fighting continues on the outskirts of Minova. Congolese forces have reportedly reinforced their position in Nyabibwe, which is 85 kilometers up from Bukavu on the western shore of Lake Kivu. And otherwise, moving back to Europe and Ukraine, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that in Poltava, in central Ukraine, an attack on a residential building on Saturday resulted in several facilities, including children. That's what local authorities are telling us. Fighting in the regions of Donetsk, Kherson, Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia also killed several people and injured scores of others. Continued hostilities in the frontline areas in recent days also damaged multiple homes, schools, and civilian infrastructure. In the wake of these attacks, aid workers responded immediately with providing emergency services. For its part, UNESCO condemned a missile attack on the historic center of Odessa, which, as you well know, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The attack severely damaged at least 2 cultural buildings placed under UNESCO's convention's protections. The organization stressed that these repeated attacks must stop and international law must be respected. And just from Colombia, our emergency relief coordinator, Tom Fletcher, released $3.8 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to help more than 42,000 people in the northeast of the country. The new funding will support displaced people and host communities in the region of Catatumbo. The resources will go towards food assistance, emergency shelter, basic household items, drinking water and sanitation, education, child protection, and addressing gender-based violence. Escalating hostilities in Catatumbo region near the border with Venezuela has affected more than 75,000 people. Over 50,000 have had to flee their homes since mid-January. The SURF allocation comes a week after the launch of the Colombian Humanitarian Response Plan, which seeks $342 million to assist 2 million of the most vulnerable people in Colombia. And an update from Uganda, where our team there is supporting the government's effort to mitigate the impact of Ebola. Agencies including WHO, UNICEF, World Food Program have repurposed $1.3 million and are mobilizing resources and expertise to provide technical, logistical, and operational support. Efforts are focused on disease surveillance, case detection and management, risk communications and community engagement, infection prevention, control, among other items. So far, there are 4 confirmed cases and 1 death out of a total 189 contacts have been isolated. We remain steadfast in our commitment to work with the government and the people of Uganda to provide an effective and sustained response that prioritizes saving lives and prevent further spread of violence. We have a new resident coordinator, and that is Arnaud Peral of France as the new UN resident coordinator in the Philippines. He started on 1 February. He brings more than 20 years of experience on sustainable development, democratic governance, gender equality, crisis prevention, conflict, and peace building. He was most recently our resident coordinator in Tunisia. We congratulate him. 3 more countries on the honor roll have paid their dues in full. No. 3 capitals that, well, out of the 3 capitals, I've only been to 2. All right. That was a little hard even for you, Benno. They are Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I've never been there. New Delhi, I've been. Rabat, I've been. So we thank our friends in Bosnia-Herzegovina, India, and Morocco. All right, Benno, come on. You tried.
Yeah, I tried hard. Thank you. The United States imposed tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico. These countries then retaliated, and then there seems to be a partial pause right now. But that aside, in general, in the light of these new looming trade war? What's the UN's position?
I mean, we're obviously concerned about the impact growing trade restriction measures can have on the global economy, particularly in developing and developing countries and in places where they're vulnerable population. I mean, as you know, the global economy is already in a low growth context. You know, while trade restrictions we see are on the rise, it's important to note that most global trade continues to follow internationally agreed to rules by the World Trade Organization, which provides stability and certainty for the global economy. Edie, and then.
Thank you, Steph. On Gar Peterson, is he working on the presumption that the United Nations will remain in an important role in trying to facilitate elections and the drafting of a new constitution?
Well, Mr. Pedersen is operating under the mandate given to him by the Security Council by 2254. Obviously, parts of that have changed because the situation on the ground has changed. However, the core principle of a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned process in which all Syrians are represented remains, and he remains focused on the task at hand, which is how to best support obviously the transitional authorities, but especially the Syrian people in that regard. One second. Michelle, then Pam.
Thanks, Steph. Two quick questions. Just want to check in to see whether Israel has shared anything with the UN on some accusations that were reported that hostages were held in UNRWA facilities.
I'm not aware of anything being shared beyond what was shared through sources in the media.
Okay. And then just with regard to USAID, which, you know, the UN has a lot of involvement with, and the turmoil that is currently surrounding that agency. Any comment you can share on how the UN is currently dealing with USAID, how that's impacting work by the UN and its agencies?
I mean, we are in touch with our various agencies on the ground. Some of this is having immediate impact on life-saving activities. I mean, as you know, the U.S. has been extremely generous to our humanitarian programs all over the world. I think the figure for 2024 is that the U.S. contributed 47% of the global humanitarian appeal, which amounts up to about $14 billion. There's obviously a lot of U.S. participation in development issues. We are trying to kind of get some more granular examples of the impact to be able to share with you. Pam.
Thanks. Thank you, Steph. There have been reports on Friday, Saturday, and I've gotten some personal reports from people in Homs and Hama that there are assassination squads against the Alawites in particular, but just assassination squads. Has Geir Peterson looked into that, found anything on that? Thank you.
I mean, we've raised the issue because this has been going, we've seen these reports for quite some days. We've raised the issue directly with the transitional authorities in Damascus, and the message is clear, is for us, is that as I mentioned, all Syrians, regardless of faith, regardless of ethnicity, of where they live, need to feel safe, right? Need to feel protected. And it is critical that the authorities in charge ensure that there is a coordination and centrality in the use of police and other powers, and that it is there to protect people and that people don't feel threatened.
Thank you.
Volodymyr, and then Yvonne.
Thank you, Stéphane. On Saturday, Russian troops launched a guided air bomb attack on a boarding school in Sudzha, Kursk region, a city under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. In that school, local civilians were preparing to evacuate. There are dead and dozens wounded. What is your assessment of that?
We've seen the wave of deadly attacks, of bombing of targets in Ukrainian city, which we clearly condemn. We also condemn the recent deadly bombing on the boarding school, which, as you mentioned, was housing civilian evacuees in Ukrainian city control of Sutska and Kursk. Directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects anywhere by anyone is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Any such attacks are unacceptable and must end immediately. Yvonne, then Deji, and then Tony.
Thanks, Steph. The UNRWA schools in East Jerusalem, did they open, as far as you know?
Yeah, I did my daily check-in. The programs are running. There was, I think, a report of a small demonstration in front of the UNRWA headquarters today in East Jerusalem, but the actual operations, the service delivery is ongoing.
Okay, so schools are open, clinics are open.
Yeah.
Everything's ongoing. Thanks.
Yeah. Deji, then Tony.
Well, first of all, the Chinese ambassador's name is not Fu Cong, Fu Cong.
Sorry,
yeah,
thank you.
Anyway, so few follow-ups. First, Gary Peterson, has he ever talked to any Kurdish delegates in Syria?
Mr. Pedersen and his team have had a wide range of contact. I think that would encompass all of the constituent forces in Syria.
Including Kurdish
I'll
people?
stick to my answer.
Okay. Second, Yvonne's question on UNRWA is how would you describe the situation now of UNRWA in occupied Palestine? Is this still business as usual? Do you feel any impact so far,
Well, listen,
except for the closure of the two headquarters?
We are continuing. I mean, UNRWA is continuing its work, obviously within a climate of uncertainty.
Okay. One last question. Does the Secretary General have any plan to talk to the U.S. President Trump?
As soon as there's something scheduled, I will let you know.
Feels like it's like another scenario of Prime Minister Netanyahu now.
That is your analysis, Deji. Tony.
Shukran, Steph. Can you confirm the reports on a letter that members of the parliament from 14 different European countries appealed to the UN Secretary General to remove UNRWA as a UN agency?
I've seen the press reports. I've not personally seen the letter, but we will check.
But, did he receive it or not?
I believe what's written in the press, so I've seen the reports of the letter. I have not gotten confirmation that it's been officially received, which doesn't mean it hasn't been officially received. It just means I haven't checked the mailbox this morning.
Would you be able to follow up
I
on
will
this,
do
please?
that. I will go straight to my front porch and I will check the mailbox, Tony. Okay, anybody online? Iftikhar, please, sir.
Thank you, Steph. Regarding the shooting at the UN headquarters in Kabul, do you have any information about the motivation of this person, this Taliban fighter?
Often when people do shoot at us, it's hard to figure out what their motives are. But I can confirm to you that there were shots fired at the UN observation post at what we call the UN Operations Center in Kabul, which is our compound. No shots were fired by UN guards, and as a result, movement and access to the compound have now been restored. We are looking into this incident to get more details.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
Thanks, Steph. A few questions rapid fire here. Special Advisor Enderitu, I'm sure you saw the article about her situation in Airmail. You were quoted extensively in it. Was the UN aware of the threats against her and the harassment that she said took place?
Well, I mean, we were aware of the public pressure she was coming under, and the Secretary General was fully supportive of her. A lot of that pressure was coming from questions from the media. So we were fully aware of the issue, and I think the Secretary General had been supportive of her.
She said she was receiving threatening emails, threatening phone calls. Was the UN aware?
We were aware of the pressure she was coming under. Yes, sir.
Second question for you. Philip Lazzarini, I think you answered a question to Michelle, but your mic cut out, about the UNRWA facilities being used to hold hostage. Does UNRWA know or care to ask what facility that might be? Or
Yes, we are looking for information. We have reached out, is my understanding, for information. I don't think any information has been shared with UNRWA beyond what was shared in certain media articles.
Last question for you. U.S. aid is being gutted, apparently, and now seems like it's been shut down. What is the relationship between UN and USA? I mean, how does this impact the relationship? What is going to be missing, and is the UN in touch with the Trump administration to try to figure out how to bridge that gap?
Yes, I mean, I think I answered that question from one of your colleagues.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
That's okay. I mean, USAID is a critical partner. The U.S. is a critical and generous partner for the United Nations in humanitarian, in development work. It is work we are able to do, life-saving work, development work, with thanks to the generosity of the U.S. and credit is given to the U.S. as it is to other donors when we do that work. But we're obviously ongoing with an assessment and try to get a bit of clarity in a foggy environment. I have time for one more question because I don't want to leave the ambassador waiting. I don't see any hands. Goodbye. Okay.